Hello, BISC130. This is the beginning of recorded lecture 5.1. So we are starting on ecology chapters. So for the next several chapters, we're going to be looking at big picture stuff from the back of the textbook. Here's kind of a diagram showing this, that we've been talking about organisms, but as we get to bigger picture things, we're going to start talking about populations, communities, ecosystems, and then eventually the biosphere. This is, stuff from first day of class, actually, but our first sort of level here is the population level. So we're going to start by talking about population ecology. Importantly, there's this tiny little break here of white in between population ecology. These are two separate key terms. So the key term ecology is defined as the study of interactions between living things and their environment. So again, bigger picture stuff, not just how an individual organism works, but how these living things and their environment sort of work together. Population, I think this is the third time population has popped up in the key terms, but again, my exams are not cumulative, so this is the third exam that it's been a key term, so I gotta define it again. Population is all of the individuals of a single species living within a specific area. So we're talking about interactions, but in population ecology, we're going to limit ourselves to just talking about interactions between individuals within a population, same species. So within population ecology, there are a few important metrics, just terms and ways that we can measure things so we could talk about what's going on here. One of these is what's called population size. It's pretty obvious what this is just based on the name. Population size refers to the number of individuals in the population. Rarely do we know exactly how many individuals are in a population. There are ways of measuring this, but usually these are approximations. You could use quadrats like this to sort of count how many species of plant are within this square and then extrapolate that to the entire field ecosystem. You could do mark and capture and release on various animals that won't stay put for something like this. And again, you're estimating the population size, but it refers to the number of individuals in the population. Another important metric is population density, which, if you know what density is, it's just size divided by area or volume. Importantly, how densely packed a population is really varies depending on species. So some species, some sea anemones here, pack themselves together very, very tightly, have a very high population density, but other species, tigers, for example, other large predators, really have a very large territory and space themselves out pretty sparsely. So exactly how dense this is something that depends on what species you're talking about. Another important metric is distribution pattern. So the pattern of distribution can be uniform, random, or clumped. What does that mean? Well, uniform means evenly spaced. There are a lot of nesting birds that have very specific requirements for their nests and will, space themselves out pretty evenly in their ecosystem. Uniform distribution. Random is something we see a lot with plants. They don't get to choose where they are. They just start growing wherever the seed lands. So their distribution pattern is going to be random as a result. And then clumped, we see this in a lot of grazing animals that, they're going to stay together for protection against predators. So they're going to choose to be as close together as possible. So, these are just some visual representations of these three distribution patterns: uniform, random, or clumped. And another important metric is something called a life table. So there's a lot of data in a life table. Don't memorize any of these numbers, by the way. But the important thing of what this is indicating is it's showing a lot of things, but mostly this is showing ages and mortality rates. within a population. So this is the Dall mountain sheep here, just as an example, showing how many individuals are of each age increment, and you can look at the mortality rates as they get older, and oh, they're all alive when they're born, and as you get older and older, the numbers start to drop off. But yeah, this is just a way to organize things. You should just know that this is called a life table, something showing ages and mortality rates within a population. This is not always the easiest thing to understand or really know what's going on here, just staring at these numbers. It's very common to graph the data in a life table. We call this graph of the data here something called a survivorship curve. So life tables can be graphed as survivorship curves, and exactly what shape the curve looks like, once again, depends on species. So here's some survivorship curves. Different shapes here. It's interesting to think about. So trees, birds, and humans, just to have three very different examples. We all start off with everyone alive. Trees have a huge mortality right at the beginning. Most of those seeds don't make it to fertile ground. They get eaten, or they, just don't land somewhere where they're going to be able to germinate and, take root. Huge drop off in survivorship at the beginning. But if they manage to survive past that, they're going to be pretty stable. They're going to live for a long time. Everything dies eventually, but most of their die off is at the beginning. Humans, the exact opposite. We're pretty stable and good at surviving into adulthood, but once we start to get, late aged, close to our life expectancy, there's a huge drop off as we die of old age and other complications due to just, being old. Birds, most birds at least, medium, small songbirds, they're just as likely to die when they're young as when they are middle-aged, as when they're old. So, don't memorize any of these lines and examples. This is just an interesting way to show that, what these survivorship curves look like. They are just graphs of life table data, and exactly what the shape looks like depends on species. Okay. All these things were just different metrics, different terms when we are referring to a population and population ecology. Next, let's return to something that should be familiar. We initially introduced this not that long ago, the idea that organisms reproduce exponentially. Yes, it is this graph again. I brought this up when we were talking about natural selection and evolution, and yes, organisms make more of themselves. However, as we saw, it tends to level out and not go onwards to infinity. What we're experiencing here in real life, this type of growth curve is not exponential. It is called logistic growth. So organisms reproduce exponentially, but because of limited resources, what we end up with is logistic growth, not exponential growth. So, labeled here, logistic growth is a sort of S-shaped thing. If I want to describe this in words, logistic growth is rapid growth at first, then it slows down, then it eventually levels out at a sort of ceiling called, very importantly, the carrying capacity. You may have noticed this labeled when I first used this figure talking about evolution, but I did not bring up carrying capacity there. I'm bringing it up here. Carrying capacity is this ceiling. Often abbreviated as C, for carrying capacity. This is defined in the key terms as the maximum number of individuals of a species that can be supported by the limited resources of a habitat. If you go over the carrying capacity, there's not going to be enough food or fresh water or sunlight or whatever to support some of those individuals. They're going to die. So this is kind of like the ceiling. You could go over this, but you can't sustain being over this. This is because of those limited resources. So we can look at this. We can see this in action. Not very exciting, but here are some yeast. These are single-celled fungi organisms. You could, start a population of yeast in a tube, grow these things up in a couple of days. They're going to experience that logistic growth, rapid growth at first, then slows down, and then levels out at this carrying capacity, the maximum number of individuals that all the sugars and stuff in the environment can support. it's not just yeast we see this in everything. So yeah, here's another example in the fur seal. So the story here, backstory. These things were hunted close to extinction for their fur. But, around the 70s, we decided, hey, we don't want these things to be extinct. Let's stop hunting them and just let them recover. And, of course, there were biologists tracking their numbers and found that, over the years, you've got slow growth at first, or it's rapid here as it starts getting going, slows down eventually, and then hits this carrying capacity before too long. And again, the carrying capacity is not a super precise number of you can only have exactly 7,500 seals, no more, no less. You can go above the carrying capacity a little bit, but it's not going to sustain itself there for very long. It's going to go a little up and down, a little up and down. But if you try to fit a line to this, to these data, it's going to be a ceiling like this. And yeah, the yeast took maybe a couple of days to get to carrying capacity. These things reproduce a lot more slowly, so yeah, it took several decades. But either way, regardless of how fast or slow, this is showing that organisms reproduce with a logistic growth curve because of these limited resources. Now, importantly, this carrying capacity exists because of the limited resources. There's only so much food for them to get, and breeding grounds and stuff like that. This carrying capacity can change if the environment changes. So where this ceiling is not stuck permanently there. If there's a change in the available resources, if there's change in new competitors coming in, or new predators coming in, or old competitors becoming extinct, or other predators becoming extinct, these things can change where that ceiling is. So here's just a generic graph of, yep, there's our logistic growth, there's our carrying capacity, something changes in the environment, now there's not as much resources available as there was before, new carrying capacity, and it's going to continue on from there. So yeah, this is the ceiling, but it is something that can change. Okay. Now, all organisms are going to, reproduce like this, have this logistic growth curve. But there are two main strategies towards growth and eventually getting to that carrying capacity. These two strategies are called K-selected and R-selected. Let's start by describing the K-selected strategy. So yep, here's my same slide, getting a lot of mileage out of these African elephants, but hey, I like using the same things over and over. Yeah, African elephants, fantastic example of a K-selected species. Their hallmarks are they have very few offspring at a time, only one for the African elephants. Their offspring are very small. They're going to spend a long time taking care of them. They're going to live for a long time. It takes them a long time to reach sexual maturity. And, they're having a very few offspring, but they're taking a lot of care of them, making sure that they survive and become adults themselves and start reproducing themselves. So this is the sort of low and slow approach to getting up to carrying capacity. So in summary, K-selected species, slow reproduction and growth, few offspring at a time, high parental care, and these things are suited to stable environments. When things are not rapidly changing in the world around them, these K-selected species are very good at surviving. They're very good competitors. Yeah, they thrive when the environment is stable. In contrast, we have R-selected. Yep, we're using these as well. Because yes, the eastern gray squirrel is a great example of R-selected. It's the exact opposite. They have a ton of offspring. Their offspring are relatively small. They take care of them, but usually not for very long. Their offspring reach sexual maturity pretty quickly. They don't live for very long, and yeah, live fast and die young is kind of the the strategy here. So R selected, it's lowercase by convention, R selected species, rapid reproduction and growth, lots of offspring, low parental care. In contrast, these things are very well suited to changing environments. Because they're having lots of offspring, if the world around them is changing rapidly, they're going to adapt much more quickly. They're going to evolve more quickly because their generation time is lower, and the chances of some of these many offspring that they're pumping out every single year just increases their chances of making it. So these things are R-selecteds are very good at changing environments. K-selecteds are very suited to stable environments. My dumb way of remembering which one is which: R-selected, rapid growth. I can't think of a synonym for slow that starts with the letter K, but if you remember, R is rapid, K is the other one, the opposite of that. So R is rapid, K is slow. Those are sort of one versus the other. Different strategies towards getting to that carrying capacity. Importantly, I showed some graphs here of organisms, going from a very small number up to their carrying capacity. Being able to observe this is very rare. Again, we had to start a new population in a lab. We had to hunt them to extinction and watch them rebound. If we look at populations in nature, we don't usually see them going through this process. Usually, if we look at populations in nature, they're already there. Most populations in nature, if you want to look at the squirrels on tech campus or whatever it is, they are already at or near their carrying capacity at most times. You would have to, follow the wake of some sort of, catastrophe or something like that to watch this logistic growth. Most stuff is already there at most times. Okay. Now, I brought up these two, as generic examples of K and R. There is one more species that I want to look at in detail to look at their carrying capacity and their growth patterns. Specifically, I want to look at humans. So we are unique in a lot of ways, but in other ways, we're the same as everything else. We live in an environment, we need resources, stuff like that. So what does our graph look like? Well, I've hidden some of this if you can't tell, because I want to start by looking at the beginnings. So this is based on archaeological data, not a lot of very accurate census data from 9,000 years ago, or I guess 11,000 years ago, 12,000 years ago, but based on archaeological data, for thousands of years, it looked like we were at carrying capacity. There's a little bit of up and down, but this looks pretty stable. This looks pretty flat. Just like everything else on the planet, we were there. Global human population existed at or near its carrying capacity for thousands of years. But then we started doing something that other organisms don't do. We started using technology. By using things like pottery and irrigation and plows and metals, we took our environment and made more efficient use of it. We had the same number of acres of land available to us, the same amount of rainfall coming down or whatever, but by using these technological innovations, we could get more food out of the same land. That effectively increased where the ceiling was, and so the population started to increase. We've got more technological innovations for mills, for example, for grinding up grains and getting flour out of that. More efficient use out of the food that we already have. More technological innovations, including fertilizers for those farms, and not really mentioned here that much, but medicine, vaccines, antibiotics. Not only do we get better resources out of our environment, but we're able to survive more and have less mortality due to disease. Nothing else on the planet is doing these same sorts of things. We used technology and medicine to increase that ceiling. So we were at carrying capacity for a long time, advances in technology and medicine have increased our carrying capacity, and it's still growing today. Again, this is looking globally. Globally, yep, numbers still getting higher, still going up. If you want to look at this not globally, like focus in on specific countries or specific regions, there are differences. Don't memorize any of this, by the way, but I mean, it is interesting to note that some countries and some parts of the world are experiencing more growth than others. Some actually are at about zero. Some parts of the world have attained carrying capacity and don't have growth year to year to year. Most of the rapid growth that we do see is in developing countries that, are getting all of this infrastructure really put together, which makes sense. So there is growth globally and in certain countries. And so an interesting question that you might be wondering is, where is the ceiling? As cool as our technology is, as great as our farming and stuff like that is, it's not infinite. We still have a limited amount of farmland and sunlight for our crops and fresh water and space. So where's the ceiling? There has to be a carrying capacity. Where is it? Well, I meant to show this. Still growing today, varies depending on country. Most of the growth is in what we call developing countries. So, all right, where's our ceiling? Well, the maximum number of humans that the resources of the planet Earth can support depends. So maybe that's not the most satisfying answer, but it is the most accurate answer. Like I said, we are weird compared to other organisms in that we use medicine and technology. We are also weird in that we think about what the world is going to be like for our offspring. This squirrel, it's not thinking, should I have offspring this year? Are there trees around here where these baby squirrels can make their nests? Is there enough food to feed all of these squirrels? No. Just have as many babies, as much as possible. Some of them are going to live. Most of them are going to die. You just do it. That's what every other organism is going through that process of not thinking about it. You just reproduce, and whatever happens, happens. But we don't work like that. We choose how many offspring we want to have. We choose, how tightly packed we want ourselves to be. And again, some parts of the world have gotten to this point where there is approximately 0% growth from year to year to year. So what it depends on is what we can call our desired quality of life. I'm sure you could, some population ecologists could crunch the numbers about how many humans you could cram on the planet and make the whole thing an urban hellscape. But it depends on what kind of quality of life we have, because we could choose how many people we want to put here. Again, this is unique. It also, if I can get a little sci-fi for a second here, it also depends on future advances in technology. Who knows what's going to happen in the next 100,000 years, whatever, that is going to, change things even more, increase the ceiling even higher. So I don't know. I like to talk about humans a little bit because of all the ways that we're weird. But at the end of the day, we still exist in an environment. We still use resources. There still is a carrying capacity. It just depends on a couple of things where that actually is. All right, let's change our sights now from the population level of ecology to the community level of ecology. So I defined community in the key terms on the first day of class. It's been a while since then, so I put it in this chapter again. Community is defined as the set of populations inhabiting a particular area. In other words, all of the individuals of all species living within a specific area. So it's not just one species we look at here. We're looking at all the different species within a specific area when we're talking about community. So now we're going to see some interesting interactions between these different species. One of these is predation. Predator-prey relationships. Canadian lynx, snowshoe hare, just as an example of here. Predators kill prey and eat them. Actually, that's what I say here. Yeah, predation happens within a community. Predators kill and consume prey. Now, it's a pretty obvious statement that this type of relationship is going to affect the prey. It's going to affect their population size, because they got stuff out there trying to kill them and eat them. And it's going to affect their carrying capacity. Not only do these prey species have to find food of their own and shelter from the elements and, all this other stuff, but they also have to avoid being eaten by predators. So, yeah, this relationship, predation, definitely affects prey population size and prey carrying capacity. But what's maybe a little less intuitive is that this relationship also affects the predators. The availability of prey affects predator population size and predator carrying capacity. This is this is sort of exemplified in this Canadian lynx snowshoe hare. I'd mentioned before that most species were at or near their carrying capacity at most times. This is kind of one of the exceptions. Not every predator-prey relationship is going to have a graph like this, but for the sake of showing how they both affect one another, I've chosen this sort of atypical example. So here's what the predator and prey populations look like if we look at Canadian lynx and snowshoe hare. So obviously, there's kind of a pattern going on here. We could start anywhere we want. Let's just start kind of in the middle right here. So we have a whole bunch of hare. We have hare population really spiking upwards. Now, once there start to be lots and lots of hare in this community, that means there's a lot of food for these lynx, and there's not going to be enough places for these hares to hide or to escape to. So as the hare population climbs, the lynx population is going to climb right after it. Plenty of food for them. They're going to have a great time. They're going to survive really well. They're going to reproduce really well. Their population is going to spike up. But eventually, they're going to kill and eat most of those snowshoe hare. The snowshoe hare population is going to really dip down as they get eaten. Well, once the snowshoe hare population reaches a low point, now the lynx are going to start starving to death. So their population is going to dip down. Now that there aren't quite so many of those predators around, the snowshoe hare population can jump back up again. But guess who's right behind them? Their predators taking advantage of lots of snowshoe hare. Their population is going to spike as well. Now that there are a ton of predators around, hares are almost all going to get eaten, their population size is going to tank, and the lynx population is going to tank with it as they start starving to death. Hares rebound, lynx rebounds, and so on. So this is illustrating what I just wrote here, that this relationship between predators and prey affects prey. It also affects predators. They affect one another's population size, and they affect one another's carrying capacity. A related relationship, but not the same thing, is herbivory, where herbivores eat plants. So, yep, here's a deer munching on a leaf. Here's a caterpillar munching on a leaf. It is a thing eating another thing, but it's not exactly the same as predation. Predation involves killing something and eating it. Herbivory usually just involves, chewing part of this plant and eating it. So it's the terminology here. We use separate words, herbivores and plants. Herbivores eat plants. We call this herbivory. What they have in common, herbivory and predation, predator-prey relationships, is they both affect evolution. So coming back to this topic, I know it was on exam number 4, but I'm referencing this again. These create selective pressures. Predation creates selective pressures on these prey species to somehow not get eaten. Herbivory creates selective pressure on these plants to somehow avoid being eaten. They both put selective pressure on prey or plants to somehow evolve defenses to not get eaten. These defenses can take many forms. One form is mechanical defenses. So if you're talking about plants avoiding herbivores, mechanical defenses can include things like thorns and spines. It's really difficult to munch off the bark of this honey locust tree. It's got these spikes very heavily defending itself. These things evolved because there were herbivores, eating them, and this discourages herbivory. It takes a lot of energy to build these spikes. They only do this if it's worth it to discourage herbivores. We see mechanical defenses in animals as well. Turtles and tortoises have tough shells that discourage predators from trying to get them. These defenses can also be chemical in nature. So here's a foxglove plant, very beautiful. Not that you would walk around eating random flowers anyway, but yeah, don't eat these. They have digitalis toxin. It will stop your heart and kill you. But yeah, very potent chemical defenses here to discourage herbivores. Monarch butterflies are not nearly as toxic, but they are toxic enough to make you very ill. Again, not that you're walking around grabbing butterflies and eating them, but no, birds are going to avoid monarch butterflies because, yeah, they're toxic enough to make you very, very, very ill. Sometimes these defenses can be chemical in nature. Another type of defense that we have among prey and plant species is camouflage, which I think we all know what camouflage is, but I mean, it's in the key terms. Camouflage is the ability of an organism to avoid detection by blending in with the surroundings. So I think we're all familiar with animals that camouflage. Here's a walking stick insect. It looks a lot like the sticks on the branches of trees in its environment, so it doesn't get eaten by birds because it looks like a stick. Maybe these ones are new to you. These are lithops. These are succulents that they're actually plants, but their size and shape and coloration greatly resemble the rocks found in their environment. So yeah, these are hiding plants. These are plants that look like rocks, and they avoid herbivores by not looking like plants, by looking like non-delicious rocks. So camouflage can happen in plants as well. Interestingly, camouflage can also be used by predators, so this goes both ways. So yep, there's camouflage in a tiger, camouflage in a polar bear. This is all selective pressure. Why these traits evolved, because there's selective pressure to not get eaten, and there's selective pressure to be able to sneak up on your prey. This is all coming back to stuff from the previous chapter, but yeah, it's important. Camouflage used by predators too. Now, there is also something that's kind of the exact opposite of camouflage. Something called, again, we're still under this, evolved defenses, aposematic coloration. This is bright or vibrant colors that warn predators to avoid the organism. This usually comes along with some sort of chemical defense. So the monarch butterfly is toxic. Don't eat it. You'll get very sick. And it's not trying to blend in with the flowers that it feeds from, or the leaves around it. It's trying to specifically stand out so that all the birds in that community are going to see it and know not to mess with it. Here's the striped skunk. You see this thing, you know not to mess with it. It's got the bright white fur, the dark black fur, and that very sharp contrast between those two colors. That's a very clear warning sign. Don't mess with this thing. So the exact opposite of trying to hide, aposematic colors is warning predators to stay away. This leads to a couple of very interesting evolutionary situations. This can lead to something called Mullerian mimicry. That's one of these things, the little umlaut over the U, Mullerian mimicry. Mullerian mimicry is, and I'm reading the key terms definition now, a type of mimicry where species share warning coloration and are all harmful to predators. So these are different species of heliconius butterflies, and just like the monarch, they're toxic. Don't eat these things. all four of these different species, they look very similar. They are four different species with, different ways they feed and lifestyles and stuff like that. They have evolved to look like one another so they could reinforce the message that, black and orange is bad times. They're all sort of helping each other out to just boost the signal of this message to all the predators in the community that orange and black don't eat me. So yeah, Mullerian mimicry, these are mimicking one another, but they are all toxic. They reinforce that message. What's more fun, in my opinion, is a different type of mimicry, something called Batesian mimicry. Batesian mimicry is, to read from the key terms, a type of mimicry where a non-harmful species takes on the warning colorations of a harmful one. So, from an evolutionary standpoint, to evolve toxicity, having toxins in your body that are going to hurt or kill a predator that eats you, that's very difficult to do. It takes a lot of steps to evolve the enzymes to create these specific chemical compounds, blah, blah, blah. It takes a long time. It is much easier from an evolutionary standpoint to evolve flashy colors. So Mullerian mimicry is when everyone's toxic and they're all helping each other. Batesian mimicry is when someone is a fake. Here's an example. European hornet. Yeah, you know not to mess with this. We've all learned that the black and yellow stripes here, we'd see this on plenty of other stinging insects. Black and yellow stripes, stay away from this thing. It is very dangerous. This is a moth. It's completely harmless. It has no stinger at all, but it has evolved the same warning coloration. So if you saw this thing buzzing around, flying around, you would probably not mess with it. You would probably avoid it, probably not want to be close to it or whatever. And from an evolutionary standpoint, way easier to evolve yellow and black fuzz than it is to actually evolve the stinger and everything that goes with it. Another example is the coral snake, which is very venomous. Black and yellow and red, and then the milk snake, Mexican milk snake in this particular example, same colors, slightly different pattern, but if you're not familiar with exactly the order of red, black, yellow, or red, yellow, black, whatever, you would easily mistake these for one another, and you would stay away from this thing. You would think that it's venomous. You would not mess with it. You would leave it alone, because it has evolved just to mimic the coloration, but not actually the toxicity at all. So these Batesian mimics are cheats, and it only works if you already have a toxic member of the community that you can mimic. So this has to come first, and then the mimic comes in, evolving just the danger patterns, but not the actual danger. And again, these are just examples. I'm not writing these specific examples down. You should know the definitions of these two different types of mimicry and how they differ from one another. Okay, we've got more community stuff in this chapter, but this is typically where I end things for now. We'll pick back up in community or population and community ecology chapter in the next one. But yeah, this is the end of recorded lecture 5.1.